Yeah, I mean, no, I haven't done empirical investigations of that sort. Of course, I mean, you can say some general things about it. You know, in a well-functioning democracy, it works better because there are no public propaganda channels there. There's still going to be disinformation too, because disinformation is global right now. A lot of the disinformation in Sweden, for example, comes from countries outside of Sweden. And that's just the situation we're in. But generally speaking, democracies will do better. And then there are some countries, and of course, authoritarian states are impossible because you can't get knowledge there. You need an open society for knowledge to emerge. But then there are some countries where, for example, I think Finland is a nice example of where they work with these issues early in the schools a lot about how to teach the kids to avoid disinformation or understand the difference between disinformation and knowledge and to find the reliable sources. So I think some countries have put a lot of effort into teaching the kids how to handle this new media situation that we're in, the new information landscape. And I think Finland there is an example of where it's going quite well in the schools with that issue. But the situation, the challenges are global, disinformation is global, and there's no country that's completely free from all this. That's just not happening in the current global digital media landscape.
I have heard and seen your second book about democracy, and and you think that democracy is good for knowledge. It's the only way to have knowledge, really have knowledge. But is democracy well defined? Could you give a precise or concise definition of democracy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very big topic in political science, but I do say some things about it in my book. First of all, democracy is a form of collective decision making, right? So we all take part in the political decision making through our voting. But no political scientist would say that a country is a democracy just because people go and vote. People vote in Russia, right? So or in Turkey, which is another authoritarian state. So voting is not sufficient. So then you can, so the sort of minimal level that has to be, minimal things that have to be in place for this voting to be a democracy are these fundamental political rights and freedoms. Freedom to demonstrate, freedom to meet, freedom of press, freedom of speech, and so on. These things have to be in place. Otherwise, the voting is just a charade. It's not a democracy. And in the book, I try to spell out a little bit more why are these basic political freedoms so important for a country to be a democracy. And I follow the political scientist Robert Dahl, who talks about the idea that you can't have democracy without enlightened understanding. And that's the idea that people have to be able to get the knowledge they need, knowledge about society and science and so on, the knowledge they need to use the political power that voting has given them. If they don't have that basic knowledge, enlightened understanding, they're not free. The voting is meaningless. So that's why the basic political rights and freedoms are essential to democracy. Then you can go, and that's what the political scientists call electoral democracy. Then there's talk of liberal democracies where you have more freedom and rights, right to, be protected from torture and things like that. You add civil liberties into it. And also division of power. So courts are non-political and so on. So there are all sorts of things that are added. But the very baseline, at least, is an electoral democracy with the political freedoms and rights. Otherwise, the voting is not a democracy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so we have some sort of a circle, a circle here. We need democracy to have better knowledge. But we also need knowledge to form a better democracy. So,
yeah, that's well put. I think that's exactly right. Democracy is a presupposition for knowledge, but knowledge is also a presupposition for democracy. That's why my second book is precisely about the relation between knowledge and democracy, because I think it's such an important issue to dive into.
So it's like these two things are like evolving together.
They evolve together and they die together. This is what's going on now, right? Yeah. Exactly. Well put.
And nowadays in many countries, with the emergence of the social network, with social network like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, so people get information from entertainers very often, and people seem to believe the entertainer more than the government or the scientific institution or reliable sources. So in this situation, what would you suggest, or we just let it be like that, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in a democracy, people are free to do these things. People are allowed to be influencers and spread false things. You can't forbid that. What you have to do is teach the population that these people are not trusted sources of knowledge. I mean, in Sweden, there's been a lot of discussions about influencers, right? And, when they talk about makeup and clothing, that's okay, because they know something about that. But sometimes they talk about things they don't know anything about, like vaccine safety and so on. And then it can become very dangerous. So I think especially young people don't quite understand what an influencer is, and that first of all, they're paid to advertise these products that they talk about, right? But they're also not experts on many things that they talk about. So I think you have to educate the public that, listen to these people, enjoy them if you find them entertaining, but realize that they're not reliable sources of knowledge on most things, and not having to do with, whatever makeup and stuff that they talk about. And the same goes for entertainers. And I think a really big challenge in the situation in the new information landscape is precisely this, right? It's not just that we have different kinds of media sources that are more or less reliable. It's also that we have all sorts of individuals that opinion leaders, various ways. Joe Rogan, his podcast has millions and millions of listeners. And he got in trouble last year because he took vaccine skeptics onto the podcast without really being critical against them, right? So these people have a huge impact in society. So they really have a very big responsibility, but they don't take that responsibility. And the tech platforms don't take the responsibility, because they're like, well, we're just a platform. So Joe Rogan doesn't take responsibility. Platforms doesn't take responsibility. His guests don't take responsibility. No one is responsible, right? This is the problem with these types of sources. So the only thing you can do in a democracy, they're allowed to do what they do. The only thing you can do is to educate the public that, listen to these people, enjoy them as much as you like, but be aware that they're not sources of knowledge.